I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this is the follow-up from the middle, bringing more of your voices into the conversation each week. And today we are following up on our episode about immigration. If you haven't heard it, we listened back to a town hall that we recorded in Minneapolis, St. Paul, right after the deaths of 2 American citizens by federal immigration authorities. That was back in January. And for this episode, we also heard from a couple of top reporters about how things have changed when it comes to immigration enforcement since what happened in Minneapolis. The short answer, they've changed a lot. And joining me now is our friend Mary Sanchez, a Kansas City-based columnist for the Tribune Content Agency. She's written a lot about the ICE crackdown since the beginning of President Trump's second term. Mary, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, and before we get to some of the listener comments that we got, what are you seeing post-Minneapolis in terms of what, if anything, has changed in ICE's tactics?
Well, nationwide, I think you see a lot less of that. Frankly, what media likes, what's easy to cover to a certain extent, is that just mass sweep crackdown, like what you saw in Minneapolis with just the swarming of agents. You saw it in Los Angeles, you saw it in Chicago. Minneapolis, certainly because of the 2 deaths. Renee Good had lived in Kansas City for a while. So, that was just huge for people here just to have that occur to someone who we had considered part of our community. Those type of sweeping raids, you're not really seeing anymore. That does not mean that ICE has gone away. Not in Minneapolis or in any other cities. It's just less full on, like a throng of officers, sweeping through or being on streets. It's different. It's more subtle. But the numbers show that the detentions are still rising. They tend to fluctuate a little bit, but the top number, I think, has been like 70,000 people being detained at one point. But now it's a more massive system where you have more of these county jails holding people, detention centers that are all set up and running. So it's more of a nationwide process.
And what do you think changed? What was the reason that the Trump administration at least pulled back on the things that we saw in the news every day? They're not being as aggressive with ICE as they were then.
I think it was the imagery. I think it was the backlash. You still see, there's going on right now, huge protests in front of the detention centers and the major detention centers. And I think, the larger ones, I mean by that, I think that is where this is headed next. But it was the pushback just from the public of, we don't want this in our streets. It was that militarization of streets that people just are not used to seeing. I mean, for the large part, immigration detention has always kind of worked somewhat undercover, out of the public sight, partly because it did, try to go towards people who had committed, say, a violent crime, and they had been incarcerated. They finished their sentence, and then ICE, Homeland Security, prior to that, it was INS, would come in and deport the people who were deportable. That all kind of happened undercover. This is so much in the public realm, and it deeply upset people. The reporting really has been really well done by many outlets, by just showing the numbers and showing that it is not the worst of the worst. I mean, this is the government's own data that just keeps pointing that out again and again. That's not who the majority of these deportations are.
Well, and when you think about the fact that it was less than 2 years ago that President Trump swept back into the White House, largely on the basis of immigration. I mean, the economy was very important and inflation was very important, but immigration was a big part of his platform. And now you look at the polls and a majority of Americans disapprove of the president's job when it comes to immigration enforcement. How did public attitudes change so quickly?
I think they saw it. They saw it on the news. Some people experienced it in their own communities. And you have just kind of that classic, this isn't who we meant. I think it was in Wisconsin. There's a case recently where a man who had become kind of just beloved in a smaller community. But I mean, I may have the state wrong, but frankly, this is happening everywhere. Someone that, has like the car auto body shop, or, they're the person that's hired at the dairy farm, or they run your favorite restaurant. And people just didn't realize that they were someone who was undocumented or didn't have status or was
Mm-hmm.
somewhere along in that process. And that person gets picked up. And then the community is like, oh, wait, wait, wait. That's not who we meant. No, we like that guy. And so it's that personalization. People are seeing literally that sometimes it's their neighbors. And, they're hearing about people being terrified and children being terrified. And I think good hearted people have a problem with that.
To that point, actually, there's an AP NORC poll that just came out last month that found 1 in 10 Americans know someone who's been impacted by Trump's immigration crackdown. 2 in 10 Hispanics in this country, and almost half of Hispanic respondents to this poll said that they're now carrying around proof of citizenship or proof of legal status because they're afraid they're going to be swept up.
Yes, I think you're seeing that. And I think that's part of what people, U.S. citizens, U.S. born citizens like myself, that's not the country that we want. You don't want people to be in fear when they actually, are legally here. Or even perhaps if they're not. It's just there's are better ways to do things. And I think that's what people are pushing for. A lot of, a lot of this is just seeing people being fearful. They're, taking extraordinary steps. I'm probably going to start writing a lot more on just showing, yes, the fear, but it's also tied up with a real resilience. There's a lot of things that are occurring in different communities where people are trying to help others out. If someone is fearful, say even if they do have legal status, they're carrying their papers with them, how can you help alleviate their concerns? And there are things where, like neighborhoods, block by block, are going out and they're doing the grocery shopping for a neighbor, or they're running errands for a neighbor who might be fearful whether or not they
Mm-hmm.
have status or not, which is, it's harsh to hear about that, but in a way it's kind of uplifting. It's people helping people.
And that is exactly what we heard from so many people in Minneapolis who came to our town hall, how much the community really supported each other in Operation Metro Surge, which was the name of the federal operation when they went in with thousands of immigration agents into Minneapolis and the crackdown there. We heard also about this from a caller just the other day. Listen.
My name is Thaddeus Grisbeck. I am a resident of South Minneapolis, and I was the president of student government at Minneapolis College while Operation Metro Surge was going on. It was an absolute atmosphere of fear, and with the amount of international students we had at our college, all people could do is try and band together and hope that things would just get better. But we didn't just lie down. We had evacuation plans for our students. We kept in contact with as many international students and immigrant students that we could. We had chat groups going. We ran our own security at all our school events. We really banded together in a moment of absolute darkness.
When I hear that, I think about the fact that the 2 American citizens who were killed in Minneapolis were both basically there to do exactly what we just heard about there. They were supporters. They were there protesting. They were there saying, this is not what we want. We want to help our neighbors who are immigrants here in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really moved people as well. There was, not everyone will go to a protest, but I think with the No Kings March, numerous things, the George Floyd prior,
Mm-hmm.
more people have participated in that type of event than would have, we have just haven't had that opportunity. I don't think. I mean, it's always there, but, this mass development. And so people kind of saw themselves to a certain extent in these protests in ways that maybe they hadn't have prior. Like, well, I went to the No Kings, someone might think to themselves. It's like, oh my gosh, what have I, if I had driven into an ICE operation? I think people are much more cognizant of how quickly situations can turn, how if they aren't de-escalated, if like what was occurring there, you had a lot of Border Patrol agents up there with Greg Bovino was still there. That
Hmm.
Border Patrol agents they're not municipal police. They're not trained to manage large outbursts, protests from the public the way Kansas City Police Department is trained for that type of thing. It's just a different type of environment that they're used to. So some of the problems that they had could have been absolutely predicted.
The other thing that I think definitely has made an impression on the Trump administration as they've shifted their policy to some degree when it comes to immigration enforcement is the economy. Immigrants are such a big part of the United States economy, both, you know, above board and also under the table. They are just a huge amount of the workforce all across this country. How much do you think the economy has been affected, Mary Sanchez, by the fear that so many immigrants have had about whether they're going to be deported?
I think that is one of the big open-ended questions. Myself, frankly, UCLA, there are a number of groups. Kaufman Foundation, based in Kansas City, is really hyper focused on entrepreneurialism and the 36 million Latinos in the United States, most of whom are US born citizens, but we're such an interconnected community. How will that community, the wealth impact, the businesses, be long term affected? We really don't know yet. I mean, you have argument by anecdote. I could write those
Hmm.
all day long because it is kind of happening in real time. We're not going to fully know for a little while, but it's not looking good. You remove that many people who are some of your top workers in terms of top business starters, which Latinos tend to be, immigrants in general tend to be for many reasons. You remove large swaths of them or take out the breadwinner in a family. There is some information from earlier studies of what that does. And it's like a 47% drop in that family's GDP
Hmm.
per household. That will have an impact in communities. It just tears the fabric apart of communities and businesses closing. Then they can't hire people. Then there's nowhere, say, the little grocery that was the one place that served a certain community, if it doesn't exist anymore. How does that impact? It just
Right.
kind of keeps growing.
Well, and we're also seeing how the immigration crackdown has affected tourism to the United States. I will say I was just on a couple of international flights on a trip last week. They were both half empty. I have friends that just flew to Europe and came back. Half empty flights as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. I want to ask you just after the break whether the World Cup, where Kansas City is one of the host cities, is seeing any difference because of what's going on. But we're going to be right back with Mary Sanchez on the follow up. Welcome back to the follow up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by Mary Sanchez, columnist for Tribune Content Agency in Kansas City. Mary, the World Cup, Kansas City is one of the host cities. What's going on? Are you seeing an effect of the immigration policies on whether people are coming, or is it not having any effect?
I think it's almost too early yet. I'm still kind of waiting. We have an issue here in Kansas City that the number that media has consistently cited, myself including, was a 650,000 extra people coming into this area. But it's over it's a month long.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they're not showing up has kind of caused numerous news stories. And people, I think, are still looking at the wrong metrics. They're trying to look at just Airbnb, they're trying to look at hotel,
Mm-hmm.
airline. What they don't realize is that, particularly us Latinos, it's like they'll make plans late or they'll move and travel with the team and show up here in different ways than what's being easily measured. I think that first number was also generated by our tourism department, kind of just guesstimating off of what they could do from old FIFA numbers. So
Mm-hmm.
we kind of don't know, but there is a lot of concern with many organizing groups about what will be the impact. How will ICE be present?
Right.
Is that keeping people away? Can they not afford some of these extra fees that were put on travel for the visa problems? That has come up. I think, there's going to be this after action, is what they would call it in law enforcement, to see what happened. We're all kind of just hoping people will still come because it's a big kudo for Kansas City to
Right.
receive these World Cup matches. And we've got 4 teams here,
Well, and
including Argentina.
the other thing that is pretty important is obviously in the last couple of months with the war in Iran, the price of gas, the price of everything has gone up, and that's, I'm sure, having an impact too on whether people are willing to spend money to do things like that. Mary, we were talking before the break just about how much the administration's tactics have changed since Minneapolis. Obviously, there's a new Homeland Security Secretary. Kristi Noem was fired. Greg Bovino from the Border Patrol was also fired by the Trump administration. But then we got this call from a listener. Listen to this.
Hi, my name is Alex from Rhode Island. I would like to push back on the idea that they have stopped targeting people and only targeting people that have criminal records. That is categorically false. I know someone and I'm very close to someone who has been swept up in an ICE raid that has absolutely zero criminal record, and she was recently swept up in a raid. There is no indication that they have pulled back at all on targeting only people with criminal records and not targeting people that don't have criminal records. I have not seen that, and in my community, we have seen that that is false.
That is false. What do you think of that, Mary?
It's always been false. Yeah, I mean, their own data has shown that the numbers of people who are being removed from the country, the vast majority do not have a criminal record in terms of like a violent criminal record. What they are doing is going through and gathering up people who might have something that I think most Americans would seem as fairly minor. Did you pass a bad check 20 years ago? How did you come across immigration enforcement in some way? Were you ordered removed from the country prior years ago and then just nothing ever came of it? That type of person, that is who is being rounded up and removed from the country. And it's happening fairly quickly. Although people are being held for longer periods of time, to a certain extent, they are kind of moving people through like a process and system very quickly. We're tracking flights to see where they come in and out of, frankly, KCI, Kansas City International is one of them, always has been. But the numbers have ticked up. And a lot of what's ticked up is just moving people from detention center to detention center and kind of around the nation before they're finally removed. There's a real concern now with starting to do kind of mass removal hearings, like in an immigration court or within a detention center, where a whole group of people would be in a room and have their cases just dismissed, and then they're ready to be removed from the country, all in one swath, which really raises some real due process concerns.
Do you think that there are differences because of state and local politics and whether the governor or the mayor is more aligned with the Trump administration in terms of where the enforcement has been happening? I was in Southwest Florida last year in a very conservative area, and I noticed that all the sounds of the gardeners doing landscaping was still there. And I'm like, I bet some of those people do not have proper documentation, but maybe nobody cares here because it's an extremely Republican area.
I think you'll see it both ways. Minneapolis was certainly targeted, I think, because of the governor, because of the prior election and how he had angered the administration. They had something to hang it on with the Somalians who had been already investigated for some real problems with graft and taking of some government funds. So there were some easy targets. The other thing is you also look at communities where there is a strong immigrant community, a strong refugee community that's not spread out across one whole larger geographic area. It's easier to target when you can just go in and do sweeps in, say, Little Chinatown, or,
Right. Right.
whatever else we call. So there is that. It's somewhat opportunistic that way. Um, it's
Yeah.
a lot of different things. A lot of different factors are pushing. I don't know that they will stay out of certain areas to keep the gardeners and the nannies, but I think that might be one of those cases where you'll start seeing people push back. And,
Right.
and I've seen that, frankly, throughout for years. Someone who is of kind of some means, perhaps, and they've always had nannies, they've always had gardeners, they've always had help, and it's just kind of in their head, well, maybe that person isn't quite fully documented. And then when that person gets picked up, they're just appalled, and they think they can fix it. I've had so many stories like that over the years, where someone will go in and they're like, well, can't I just pay to make them legal? And then when
Right.
they find out how hard the system is, they're just floored. But it's because they're trying to save their one special immigrant.
Right. Right. They're one special immigrant. Mary, do you think that the administration has achieved the goals that it set out to accomplish when it comes to immigration?
I think it depends on who you ask and which goal. I mean, certainly things have calmed down at the border. They
Mm-hmm.
really have. And that partly, and this in any immigration conversation, you always have to keep this in mind. We are part of global migration streams. And there were some reasons for why so many people were showing up at the border at the time that were not all about Joe Biden. It's about global things that are occurring. You don't see the numbers at the border, and that was a problem. So that is an achievement. But the way these other things are occurring, that's causing them more trouble. Unless you're really just on kind of a far right anti-immigrant, talk. There's a certain quadrant of people that are always going to think, oh my gosh, we don't need any of these people here. And that suddenly, your groceries are going to be affordable if they're not here.
Mm-hmm.
That's always going to be part of it. But I think people, if anything, are understanding immigration more and more. They are seeing how entwined immigrants are in communities, how important they are, and they're disturbed at how things are occurring. It doesn't mean that they don't want people to, quote, do it the right way. I think people still want that, but they want it to be fair.
All right, Mary Sanchez, you get to make a prediction like everybody else who comes on the follow-up. What is yours?
It's very hopeful. I think Argentina will win the World Cup again. Spain and France can be mad about that, but that
Yeah,
would be my prediction. We will see. And I'm
interesting.
hopeful, though, that that the World Cup will go off without any major incidents. I mean, that I am hopeful for, because that is better for everyone.
I went to Argentina many years ago, and I remember asking an Argentinian about the hierarchy of the Spanish-speaking countries in the world. And he said, well, Mexico is the biggest economy of all of them. And then Spain is like grandpa. And then, of course, Argentina is the next most important one. They're very proud people in Argentina. It's a beautiful country.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't put themselves first,
Right.
actually, in that conversation. Although Messi is here right now in Kansas City, so we have.
Wow. That's
But
awesome.
yeah, it is really exciting in that way, and frankly, that's kind of another hopeful prediction, is that through the World Cup, more people will be exposed to more immigrants in ways that are positive, that can help going forward with these conversations, whether they're community or political.
That is Mary Sanchez, columnist with the Tribune Content Agency. Mary, thank you so much. As always, great to see you.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Our next middle episode is coming this week. We're going to be talking about what social media addiction is doing to all of us, and if there's anything we can do about it. Follow us so you don't miss it. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Talk to you soon.